I'm Jeff Jones, as I met yesterday. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some of the drilling risks that and associated sort of insurance coverages that are applied. My background, I've been working in the insurance industry since 1989. Before that, I spent a few years working offshore on oil rigs and onshore oil rigs just to try to make some money and get by. Right, this slide, we've talked a lot about, you've seen a lot of the different oil rigs that are onshore and offshore, and this slide here really is just it's a shot of the drilling crew that are working on, this is, what they're doing right now is they're effectively bringing the drill pipe out of the hole, so they're doing what you call tripping. So you've got the driller there, you've got roughneck there, motorman there, and then up in the derrick, there'll be the derrick man who is effectively going to be pulling the pipe back, usually in stands of 90 feet, and so it just gives you a bit of an idea about the crew themselves. Right, so the well-rated, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the formations and the wells themselves, and also the associated insurance coverages that apply to the operator's extra expense cover. The cover consists primarily of well control, reconditioning or drilling of the well following a blowout, seepage and pollution, and there's some additional coverages that and extensions that apply to this particular insurance program. The form is called, there's a standard market form, and it's called the Energy Exploration and Development Insurance, EED 886. Right, so some of the well basics for oil and gas drilling. What you've got here is, this is just a schematic which shows the BOPs that we were talking about before, the blowout prevention equipment. This is a very important piece of kit. The rams that, these particular bits that are sticking out here, there's three different rams that they have. One of them's the blind rams, which effectively close the BOP when there's no pipe in the well. Then you've got the pipe rams, which basically close around the drill pipe when it's in the well, so that you can use your choke manifolds or various other bits of equipment to deal with any kind of incident. And then the third one, which was the problem with Macondo, was the shear rams, which in that case of Macondo did not actually shear. What that means is that it basically, if there's trouble, they need to close everything, and it shears right through the pipe and just closes off the well, hopefully. Doesn't really show the monkey board up here. That you've got the traveling blocks which go up and down, pulling the pipe out of the hole. You've got your mud pumps and your Kelly, all the various pieces of kit which are on, they're standard for all rigs, on offshore and onshore rigs. This is sort of another shot of one of Cliff's earlier ones from Oil Basics yesterday, which effectively shows the different stages of the wells. You've got your 26-inch sort of open hole that you do with your casing, the first string of casing, and it just telescopes down till you get down to your TD, your total depth. So they basically drill down through the formations, and then after they get to a certain depth, they pull out and then run casing all the time, and the casing actually helps control the well and allows the formations to be sort of maintained. Again, here you've got the pictures of the mud coming down up the annulus in the inside of the casing, and that's taking all of the cuttings, all the drill cuttings that you've got, as well as conditioning the mud. Oops, don't want to go that way. Right, well this slide is there's a number of different wells or types of wells that you can be drilled here. So this slide here just shows you, it shows you that one. You've got your vertical wells right here, so it's pretty straight. It's just traditional sort of vertical. Directional wells, these kind of deviate slightly, and you can have a number of sort of different ways of doing it, as you can see here, all of them going into the formations. This is a horizontal well. They've been drilling horizontal wells for a number of years now, probably 25, 30 years. It's a different type of drilling. You have to be quite careful with it. It doesn't use the rotary table as such. It's more into using pressure from your mud pumps. And what they do there is obviously they're able to sort of access the formations in a more defined method. Then here you've got your multilateral completion wells, which again allows you to sort of do more than sort of one well into the various formations that you have. These are the reservoirs over here. The gas, oil, saline water. So you drill through your seals. Generally, when you drill a well, you will go all the way down to past your pay zone, which is the reservoir, into the basement, which is when you will then sort of cement it, seal it off, and then at a later date come in and perforate it. I think Cliff had some good shots yesterday on that subject. Again here, this is just a diagram of some of the wells and the equipment that used. Your mud tanks is where you mix all of your chemicals to assist in the lubrication of the wells. They just run along the mud pump lines, go down the center of the well to the drill bit, up the annulus again, and then comes out through the wellhead, through the shale shakers, which effectively just allow you to reuse the mud, but take out all the cuttings at the same time. And it's just a continual process. You just continually circulate, hopefully, with that. Right, okay, so we've talked briefly about this before, but in any of the formations, let me just see if I can move this out of the way a bit. So they contain your fluids, your oil, your gas, your salt waters. The fluids can, under certain circumstances, flow into the well. On that previous shot, you can see where the formations were, and they can actually, if they're without any sort of control mechanism, come into the well. The deeper you go, you have higher pressure. So the primary defense against the inflow of the formation fluid is the hydrostatic pressure, which is exerted from the drilling mud. So it's a close monitoring of the drilling mud all the time. They have dedicated mud engineers, they call them, and they're specialists. They work very closely with the derrick man. They're always sort of doing all pH tests. They're monitoring all the mud at any given time, trying to work out in conjunction with the geologist what they feel is going to be down there, so that they can actually control the. You don't want to have it too heavy, because that slows the drilling down, but at the same time you need to have it a little bit heavy, the mud heavy enough so that it actually can control any type of kicks or any type of circulation situation that you might come across. So it's a very important job, and it's sometimes a bit of an art rather than a science, but it's an important factor in the successful drilling of a well. As I mentioned before, it keeps the drill bit lubricated, it cools it down. It's very, very hot down there, so you need to sort of keep it going functional, and it helps carries out all of the formations that you're drilling through, all the cuttings. Other types of drilling that they do is there's under and overbalance drilling. It requires close monitoring because you're effectively running at the sort of low end of what the mud weight should be. Sometimes they're quite successful to use that in areas where they're mature fields perhaps, and there's, you have a sort of enhanced oil recovery type methodology. But when they first came out, underwriters were really quite unsure of what to do because it was a fairly new science in there, but it's been proven with good operators to be very successful methodology to drill. The shallower formations, sorry, I'm getting my glasses on. To protect shallower formations from high mud hydrostatic pressure, it's necessary to isolate these formations from wellbore and casing and cement. So that's the reasons why you're running those casings in there and you're putting all of your tubing and things in there. Right, so what is a well out of control? You have above ground blowouts, which are uncontrollable flow into the atmosphere from the well. You have underground blowouts, which is a flow into another formation. You have kicks, which basically, they flow into the well, and if you're not monitoring your drilling fluid pressure correctly, it can lead to a blowout. So, I mean, kicks happen quite regularly, and there's a number of reasons for them to go. But as we state here, that you have the loss of hydrostatic pressure, the loss of circulation, which means that the actual drilling fluids are dissipating, they're disappearing into the formations. So you don't have that continual circle of mud going through the system. There's human error. You can just get these things wrong on occasions, either for equipment failure or the fact that maybe you're not doing the right kind of mud engineering type activity on there. So this is just a picture of some of the above ground blowouts, and you can see here that that's the drilling rig right there. So they've got a serious problem. Again, this is just, the guys right here are well control experts. They're actually standing back with their shields here, and they're basically trying to work out how they're going to cap this well. And then this just shows a flow coming out from a well site. The next slide here is above ground blowouts. No, actually, sorry guys, I'm going the wrong way here. Okay, so this slide shows the high pressure gas migrating through a weak formation. So it's coming down to where the drill bit is, but when it's coming back up, before it reaches to any of the casing, which can control the actual pressure, it's just dissipating into the weak formation zones. So you're losing your circulation there, you're losing your hydrostatic pressure, you're basically starting to get yourself in a bit of trouble. Okay, as far as the insurances are concerned, we have specific definitions for pretty much all aspects of it, for the well being out of control. So the policy wording deals with definitions for that, and as well as a lot of the other coverages. So the definition for a well out of control is when there is unintended flow from the well of drilling fluid, oil, gas, or water above the surface of the ground or the water bottom. And it's defined as being the flow that cannot be properly stopped by use of the equipment on site, or of the BOPs, or of any choke manifolds or any other type of equipment that you have. When we say required by policy conditions, the EED form actually specifically has a blowout prevention warranty, which specifies that you have to have you have to have a BOP installed. The kind of gray area about all that generally is, where do you install it? A lot of operators would like to actually not have the BOP installed onto a well till, say, 3,000, 4,000 feet. That's quite deep. The reason that they don't want to do that is they're reasonably comfortable with what the formations are that they're drilling into at that time, but underwriters would generally like to see it installed right after you do the surface well. So you do your 36-inch or 26-inch, depending on how deep you're going. The wider at the surface is dependent on how deep you're going at the bottom. And once you've actually installed your surface casing, that's when the BOPs would be in there. So if you want to do that differently, and we're quite aware of that because we have well questionnaires where we ask this kind of information, and if it's stated that they're not going to do the BOP, say at 3,000 feet or whatever, we'd have to talk to underwriters and say, well, look, they're not in breach of the warranty, but they don't want to do it at that particular time, and this is the reasons why. So you have to make the underwriters aware of this, and at which time you can either get a yes or a no. I have to tell the underwriters that they're not the experts here, but they are insuring the wells, so they've got every right to sort of ask these questions. So a well is brought out of control when the flow stops, is stopped, or can be safely stopped, or the drilling, deepening, servicing, etc. operation taking place in the well prior to the occurrence is resumed or can be resumed. These are direct quotations, which is why I'm sort of reading them out, because it's extracted from the actual policy wording. The wells is or can be returned to the same producing, shut-in, or other similar status that existed immediately prior to the occurrence, or the flow is or can be safely diverted into production, whichever shall occur first. So there's clearly defined situations as far as when this is. The only time it changes is you still have to go through the regularity authorities, which is not always easy, but that's the process you go through to get the okay to decide when it's brought under control. Well, okay, so why purchase control of well insurance? the obvious ones is you're going to protect your cash flow and your profits, and it protects your the balance sheet of the company. It's quite often forms part of the requirement of a lease or license grant that you get from the government. They'll say that, you know, you need to have this type of insurance in place. It could be a requirement of the lender, and they may just say that we need to have this type of insurance. Contractual obligations to the co-adventures. I mean, it's particularly relevant if the operator doesn't buy insurance themselves, and a good example of that is BP. BP do not buy control of well insurance. They basically buy only statutory liability insurance. They also buy construction insurance. And as Robert alluded to yesterday, there can be a lot of problems with construction policies, and so a lot of captive insurance companies would not like to maintain that risk. They would actually go to the commercial market for it. They may take a slight share, but they basically need to do it on behalf of the co-ventures, which was the case on Macondo, for example. Mitsui had, I think, 200 million, and Anadarko had 250 million of OEE cover. That blew through very quickly. It didn't take too long for that to go, but that type of insurance cover effectively is deemed to be the responsibility of the operator. Even though they don't purchase it, they should get a quotation and then offer those terms to their joint venture partners. Some people don't like to do that. I mean, Total, for example, they're not a big fan of doing that themselves. They generally sort of are, they kind of put things into their own captive and don't often offer it to other people. But I mean, everybody's got their own way of doing it. But generally speaking, you should actually do that as an offer for the joint venture partners. So you also might have the cover for to provide evidence of the cleanup funds. Again, this ties up with the next slide with environmental protection. The government may say that you have to have this. We need to be able to clean up, an incident in the event of a loss. And I guess as far as avoiding negative publicity goes, like if BP had insurance, for example, on the Macondo well, then they probably wouldn't have had to have the same sort of level of involvement from their senior managers. I mean, I remember watching one of the U.S. Senate hearings, and there's a senator from somewhere in the States saying to the CEO of BP, why didn't you know about this exploration well and the activities? Well, I don't know what you think, but I mean, a CEO of a Fortune 100 company, if he actually knew details about one exploration well in the Gulf of Mexico when BP have thousands of wells that are being drilled around the world, I mean, that's kind of a bit of micromanagement, don't you think? If they actually had the insurance, and the insurance company would say, well, look, we have our legal representatives, so we're going to talk to them. So it actually moves you away one step a bit from, I mean, it was such a big deal, you'd have to say something, but generally speaking, if you've seen other blowouts before, it's generally a representative from a legal firm who's been appointed by the insurance company to actually address those kind of situations. So who buys the coverage? Well, it's usually the oil lease operators and non-operators. Sometimes you get the drilling contractors doing it, and occasionally you'll have turnkey drilling contractors. Predominantly, that's more of a program that is actually favorable in the USA, where they have a lot of small operations going on, where the owner or operator may not have the willingness or to do that whole process. So they will often ask the drilling contractor to take out those insurances. The more common approach is for the operator to do that, but there are occasions when other people can. So basically, the responsibilities that are defined by nature of the drilling contract. So you've got three different types predominantly. You've got day work contracts, which are paid by the day. Footage contracts, obviously, they're paid by the well depths achieved. And then you have turnkey contracts, which are paid for, it's basically for the whole project. In 10 days, then why would you do 5,000 feet in 20 days? You just go as fast as you can. And generally speaking, it could lead to more cases possibly of human error. Okay, so as far as underwriters are concerned, what are the basic coverage that is available under EED 86? The key point here is that well control does not provide physical loss or damage. So it's a non-asset-based type insurance cover, yeah? And it's basically generally in 3 sections. You have your control a well, which is effectively ensuring that you're protecting against your blowout type situations. You have re-drilling and extra expense in the event of a blowout. You have to re-drill the well, and you have extra expenses associated with having to re-drill that well. And then also, as a result of a blowout, you can have situations where you have seepage and pollution and cleanup and containment expenses. So the cover for these wells, you have to have these wells declared. So at inception, you declare what these wells are, and if you don't have them declared, then there's basically no cover. So you've got cover for your drilling, producing type wells, your workover, and shut-in wells. I'll talk more about that later. But the re-drilling and the seepage and pollution cover, they're only triggered by a claim, a recoverable claim under Section A. So you have to have a control a well incident first before you can actually have the seepage and pollution and re-drilling. So if there isn't an insurable claim under the control a well, then and there's an event where there's the seepage and pollution, then that will not trigger it. It won't kick in. Now, the whole OEE section as such, control a well, is done on a combined single limit basis. So A, B, and C, or by getting special dispensation from the underwriters as part of your OE policy. Or if you have a third-party liability section, you can actually extend the cover to do that on a negotiable basis. Okay, so there's specific definitions for all 3 of these sections, which these are, again, extracted from the policy wording, so they are word for word on here. And it just explains how the indemnity for the costs and expenses are incurred by the insured. I can read through them if you're not sick of my voice already, but you can read them yourself. I think the key there is always is really just to defining, how the actual trigger is for these type of coverages. Again, and there's a definition for the re-drilling extra expense coverage. Indemnity for costs or expenses incurred by the insured, again, to restore or re-drill an insured well or any part thereof, which has been lost or otherwise damaged as a result of the occurrence, giving rise to a claim which would recover under Section A if the assured's retention applicable to Section A were nil. So the key again here is that everything hinges on what happens on Section A before Sections B and C. Seepage and pollution, you can see there's a little bit more of, it's quite more expansive on the indemnity there. And again, it talks really a lot about, the sums which the assured shall, by law or under the terms of any oil and gas thermal energy lease license, or is liable to pay for the cost of remedial measures, and or the damages for bodily injury or loss of damage or loss of use, property caused directly by seepage pollution arising from the insured wells. And then they talk about removing and nullifying and the cleaning up in the seepage and pollution and the contaminating substances. Costs and expenses incurred for the defense of the claim resulting from actual or alleged seepage and pollution or contamination from the insured wells. So it kind of outlines it all, but it caps it off by saying, you can't extend the CSL of the liability over all the policy sections. Okay, so some of the additional coverages that you can get within the OEED form, again, you have the underground blowout. Underground blowout doesn't come as a standard type cover. It is an aspect which is part of the additional coverages. I mean, I very rarely see one where there isn't an underground blowout included because, begs the question, why would you have it kind of thing on there. And again, this reimburses the insured for the actual costs and expenses incurred in regaining or attempting to regain the control of the unintended surface flow of the oil, gas, or water, or of the other fluid and subsurface zone to another subsurface zone. So again, defines how that is. And generally speaking, it can be quite a complex situation when you have that. And a lot of the loss adjusters that we deal with are actually ex-petroleum engineers or geologists, or they're quite professional people, and so they have a pretty clear understanding of really what the risks are. Again, additional coverage for care, custody, and control. And the policy can be endorsed to cover the insured's legal or contractual liability as the oil lease operator or co-ventures. And it's in relation to their oil field equipment, including all the drill pipe, drill collars, subs, drill bits, core barrels, leased or rented, insured in their care, custody, and control, and at the site. So it's basically all covered for that. The care, custody, and control limit is usually quite small, and it forms part of the coverage that underwriters will give. But in general terms, it doesn't really deal with a lot of the equipment that you may have, that you might have as far as the transits and everything else that goes. So quite often what you'll have is in addition to having your control of well section, you'll also have, on a standalone well program, you'll have, or in a standard exploration package well program, you'll have your control of well, you'll have your third-party liability, and you'll have your equipment all risk. And the policy is often triggered. People always generally say, well, when's the spud date? That's when the policy will incept. But quite frankly, the policy really should incept when you start mobilizing the equipment. Because you can't spud the well without having the rig there. You can't have the rig there without having all the equipment there. So technically speaking, you should really incept the cover from when you're going to start transiting the equipment from the supply base to the well location. And then you can spud the well. But other coverages that you can get, so you have the deliberate care, custody, and control, plus you generally have equipment all risk. Deliberate well firing, well, that's the well comes out of control as defined and is fired for safety reasons or at the instruction of the government authority. Quite often the government will say, okay, you need to set a charge, you need to blow this thing to stop it. So again, there's cover for that. And also you have cover for contingent joint venture, which is cover in the event that another joint venture has an insurance cover or doesn't have an insurance cover that actually doesn't respond to it. So there's a contingency there for the underwriters to be, or for the operator to be able to claim off that policy in the event that one of the other JV partners is unable to do so. Some more additional coverages. You have evacuation expenses. That's more relevant on onshore rigs or onshore wells. I mean, offshore, what are you going to evacuate? There's not much to evacuate. It doesn't cover the drilling personnel or anything like that. So it's not a first-party type expense. It's a third-party type expense. A good example of that would be, and Cliff's got to help me here because I never pronounce this right, is the Lapinda well in Indonesia, where Porto Santos had been stuck with it, but that's been going on for, I don't know, a couple of years now. And they had to effectively move all these villages that were around there because they basically, it's just bubbling up. And so they have this kind of lava overflow that's going all over the place. And basically, Porto Santos was about the only, they weren't even the operator, but they were about the only one that was left out of the assureds that kind of had a policy in place that had relatively deep pockets. So they've had to shell out hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on trying to control the well because they blew through their policy limits quite early on. But again, they had to transport all of the people that were in all these villages and move them to safe haven. And basically, yeah, so evacuation it's an important cover. But for offshore, it's usually a gimme. Underwriters don't normally charge anything for that offshore as such. Then you've got your extended redrill, and the key here, I think, is really that it's damage as a direct result of the physical loss or damage to the drilling rig or the drilling and or workover rigs. So as opposed to the redrilling that you might have in the event of a blowout, this can actually, this cover assists you in the process of if you have a damage to the actual rig and the equipment itself that results in a well incident, then you can get cover for that on there. Another additional cover is making wells safe, which effectively is, again, when you have a drilling rig or surface equipment positioned over the well, it's been lost or damaged. So again, it's another incident which is not directly related to a control of well incident as such. Okay, so what are the main policy exclusions? Well, Again, wells being drilled, if you have a well that's drilled before the cover attaches, then that's really not, that's not going to be covered. I mean, for some of the big operators that have got quite extensive programs, you don't really need to list every single well down there. If you can get the underwriters to agree to sort of a blanket cover, then that's really where you want to be at. But if you don't have a big account that the assured has, then effectively you end up having to sort of drill or deal with each one of these wells in isolation, and they will actually have dates when they start and everything. But if you do the whole policy from an inception date, then generally that's okay. But if the well isn't scheduled, and technically speaking, as far as the wording is concerned, if the well isn't scheduled, and it basically, you don't have the right spud date on there, then you can have an issue with it. Again, the loss or damage to the drilling production equipment is excluded because generally speaking that would be included under the equipment all risk section that you would have as a separate policy. Again, we're not, the delay or loss in reservoir pressure, I mean, that's not a controllable event. I mean, the underwriters are, that's really an operator type bearing loss. They have no idea, the underwriters, on what this is, and sometimes the assured doesn't either, actually. But, right. We also have exclusions for fines and penalties. And then there's exclusions for punitive damages. Obviously, they're not going to pay anything excessive what's already been agreed on there. Earthquake cover in specific stated areas. So if you want that covered, then you have to deal with the underwriters on an ad hoc basis on where you are actually on location. And war and terrorism is also excluded from the control of well.